Good evening, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you all for being here tonight, and a big thank you to the South Shore Conservatory for collaborating with the Alzheimer's Association on this event. My name is Jennifer Hoadley. I'm the Regional Manager of Southeastern Massachusetts for the Alzheimer's Association Massachusetts New Hampshire chapter. We're so happy to have you here with us tonight at our South Shore AlzTalks research event. Some of you may already be aware of the various AlzTalks and other research symposiums that we offer across our two-state chapter. This particular event began as a conversation between Association board member Jean Morse-Jones and her friend Joni Middleton about dementia and where we are currently with research. This then led to a meeting in Joni's kitchen with the Alzheimer's Association and the South Shore Conservatory being at the table, literally, to plan this. It has taken shape wonderfully, and tonight we have all of you here as part of this event. So thank you to everyone that took part in the planning process. In a few minutes, you'll hear from my colleagues about the mission of the Alzheimer's Association and an overview about what we do. Before we get to that, I want to highlight that our resource table at the resource table in the back, there's 3 tables, and you can find lots of information about the Alzheimer's Association, the South Shore Conservatory, and also some research information. Also, I want to tell you a little bit about some upcoming programs taking place locally, as well as online options through our alzwebinars.org. Also information at the table that you can peruse. There are some flyers for upcoming ALZ meetups, which are social get-togethers for people living in the early stages of the disease and their care partners. We also are here to support communities that are working to become part of the dementia-friendly Massachusetts movement, from training first responders in the communities to programs for businesses to recognize the signs and better support their customers impacted by dementia. Many of our programs are presented by association staff, but in order to extend our reach in our communities, we're building a fantastic team of trained volunteers to help in being community connectors and trained presenters. We're always recruiting. That means all of you. We're always recruiting. So if you'd like to learn more about our family support volunteer training program, stop by the resource table. We have a flyer for that as well. Speaking of volunteers, we have many volunteers in action here tonight from our South Shore Alzheimer's Association Community Partnership. They've been helping on site tonight, as well as helping to get the word out about this event and other programs in the community. Stay tuned for the partnership's Spring Caregiver Conference taking place at the end of April. And please visit the resource table to learn more about how to join the partnership, as well as the great respite grant available to caregivers. That's enough from me now. I want to turn this over to Ann Smith-White, the Senior Director of Community Engagement from the South Shore Conservatory.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ann Smith-White, and as Jennifer said, I'm the Senior Director of Community Engagement at South Shore Conservatory. I'd like to welcome you to Laura's Center for the Arts, our new classroom and performance venue through partnership with the South Shore YMCA. I thought I'd give you a little background about SSC and why we're hosting this AlzTalks program tonight. South Shore Conservatory is the largest community school for the arts in Massachusetts. This year, in 2020, we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary. That's 50 years of providing access to excellent instruction, therapy, and performance on the South Shore. South Shore Conservatory serves over 10,000 people every year, and that number keeps growing as the word spreads. At South Shore Conservatory, we believe that the arts change lives, all lives. Participation in the arts builds creativity, encourages self-expression, stimulates wellness, creates community, and banishes loneliness. It connects us with the best parts of our collective humanity. Through creative arts therapies, our highly qualified therapists use the arts to maximize participants' abilities. Singers in South Shore Conservatory's Community Voices Chorus for adults with developmental delays build friendships, and express their creativity every Wednesday night. In our Singing with Parkinson's chorus, participants work on respiratory control while singing Beatles songs. At memory cafes, people with memory loss and their care partners come together in arts activities, building community and sparking joy. If you're interested in hearing more about our inclusive, accessible arts programming, please stay and talk with my friends Amanda Riopel and Caitlin Mazzilli, who are members of our Creative Arts Therapies team. Amanda and Caitlin, can you just give a wave? They're standing in the back of the room. Please feel free to stay and talk to them. They're happy to answer any questions that you might have, especially about our memory cafes. And there's information on the back table if you're interested in learning more. South Shore Conservatory is honored to partner with the Alzheimer's Association of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, to provide accessible programming to our friends and neighbors on the South Shore. We are so happy to have all of you here tonight. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Wessler, Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Kelsey Goslin, Manager of Medical and Scientific Research Engagement. Thank you.
See. So Anne, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And it is a pleasure to be partnering with the South Shore Conservatory. We've been doing work in the past, and I hope this is a representative of a lot of future collaborations. And we appreciate so much all of you coming out to really learn about and see what we can do about this very, very challenging issue of Alzheimer's and dementia. So I'm going to kick this off and talk a little bit about, very briefly, about the Alzheimer's Association is doing. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Kelsey, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the research, and then we'll introduce the keynote speaker for tonight. So as you can see here, the Alzheimer's Association, you can sort of see our little logo there too. We really are about people and science. We are a global leader in both, and our dual focus is doing everything possible to help individuals who are living with this disease and their families today, and simultaneously doing everything we can to advance the science so that we can make Alzheimer's something in the history books and not something that we're dealing with each and every day today. The impact of Alzheimer's disease, many of you may know some of this, but just a few statistics, because it does have such an incredible impact. 5.8 million Americans today, this is a global disease, but here in the US are living with this disease. And by the year 2050, we fully expect, unless we have disease-modifying treatment, that this will go to 14 million Americans. So the pressure is definitely on to see some advancements on the science. In addition, more than 16 million Americans are actively involved as what we will call informal, unpaid caregivers. Some of you in the audience may, in fact, I'm guessing, either are currently in that role or have been in that role. So it's almost a 3-to-1 factor in terms of people with the disease and their care partners, caregivers. And Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in America. I think sometimes that even surprises people. Can you die of Alzheimer's? Yes, 6th leading cause of death in the US. Now, we often talk about the mission of the Alzheimer's Association with 3 C's: care, cause, and cure. Most of tonight is going to be talking to you about our quest to find a cure for this disease. But I'm going to a little bit follow up on what Jen Holy was telling you about, particularly on the care side. So you can see from this slide that we have really a host of educational programs that we provide to the public. All of our services to families and the public are delivered at no charge. We believe Alzheimer's disease is a challenging enough health situation that ability to pay should not be a barrier. We serve somewhere around 45,000 people in the 2 states of Massachusetts and New Hampshire annually, and you can see here that we deliver a host of educational programs. This is one example, but educational programs for people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia, for caregivers on caregiving techniques, what are the 10 signs, communication skills, how to handle challenging behaviors, and a whole host of other programs. Jen briefly mentioned our early stage engagement programs. We have those throughout Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Again, these are free programs for people who are living with dementia today in a normalized setting in the community. So whether they're attending a art and cultural program, or taking a gentle hike with a docent from the Appalachian Mountain Club, or meeting at a Starbucks or another coffee house. We have dozens and dozens of these programs offered across our 2 states. We work with support groups, well over 100 support groups. Again, in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, we train all of those facilitators to try to do everything we can to make sure that the public is receiving the best possible guidance and facilitation. We provide care consultation or care planning. Much of this is done over the telephone. You can also visit us at any one of our 5 offices, including the one in Raynham that Jen Hoadley works out of. But we are always available to help families navigate this very, very challenging disease. Of course, you can visit us online at alz.org. Where there's really a nice wide array of educational and services available to you. And if there's one message we can lead for you, and our phone number is also on this banner, we have a 24/7 helpline, and it really is staffed 24/7. We know that there are many people in America today, they may be in the workplace, they don't want to really be talking about a parent or a spouse that's living with this disease. They go home, they have dinner, maybe they have children at home and making sure they have homework, and they say, oh geez, I guess I should call the Alzheimer's Association, but no one will answer. It's 10 o'clock at night. You call, you go home tonight, you call us at that 800 number, 1-800-272-3900, and the phone will be answered. Alzheimer's Association, how may we help you? We are available 24/7 to Americans across this country. And my final slide before I turn this over to Kelsey is just to talk to you very briefly that we're very active on the public policy front. We are a completely nonpartisan organization. And in fact, we've seen incredible support for this across Republican and Democrat aisles, but we need to be in that space because so much of what we do, both on the care and support side, but also on the research side, our government has a big role to play. On the federal side, you should know that every single member of Congress in America has a volunteer action team assigned to them. These are volunteer advocates like many of you. I know Jean and her husband David are assigned to Congressman Lynch, and their job is to politely be in the face of the member of Congress to say, Alzheimer's is very important, we need your support, here are our priorities this year, can we count on you? And you can see from this slide, one of our top priorities has been to increase the federal research targeted funding for Alzheimer's and dementia research, which we were told back in 2011 would never happen. Well, back then, it was about $448 million a year was allocated to Alzheimer's research. Just to give you a sense, heart disease was at 5 billion, cancer's at 6 billion, HIV/AIDS is at 3.5 billion. Well, you can see what's happened since 2011 with all those incredible advocates. In 2019, we're now at $2.3 billion a year that's being allocated to Alzheimer's and dementia research, and currently before Congress and making its way through the Appropriations Committee is another more than $300 million request that we, the Alzheimer's, are advocating for. So because of advocates like you here in the room today, we really are making a difference and certainly making sure that our elected officials are making this a top priority for the United States. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Kelsey Goslin, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our work on the research space. Kelsey.
So before we get into the main program, talking about all of the hopeful, exciting research that's taking place in the dementia space, we wanted to let you know what the Alzheimer's Association is doing to lead the fight to end Alzheimer's across the world through research. I'm not going to go through every single item on this slide, but I wanted to showcase how the Alzheimer's Association is working to connect, convene, fund, and catalyze research across the world. Each of these different images that you see represent different consortium, different meetings, different ways and avenues that the Alzheimer's Association is working to bring everyone to the same table to address common challenges. For example, we have our research roundtable where we bring together biotechnology companies, regulatory agencies like the FDA, federal agencies like the National Institute of Health, bring everyone to the same table to see what are the challenges to developing effective treatments and how can we overcome those collectively as quickly as possible. We also convene researchers around the world through our Alzheimer's Association International Conference. This is actually the largest research conference in the world, bringing together over 6,000 researchers each year to help share ideas, collaborate, address common challenges again, and really help move the field forward as quickly as possible. We're also involved in different studies and different avenues throughout the year to help connect and convene researchers, but I wanted to highlight our grant program. So we have an international research grant program where we're actually the largest private nonprofit funder of dementia research in the world. And we have a strong commitment to funding new ideas, attracting new talent into the field, and really trying to accelerate research as quickly as possible. So we fund dementia research across all types of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, dementia with Lewy bodies, and more, from all areas of research too, from basic science, looking at the biology and how the biology of the brain is changing with some of these different types of dementia, to all the way through drug development and clinical trials, and looking at ways to reduce risk and even prevent the disease. Currently, we have over $165 million invested in research around the world right now. And this is in 500 projects across 27 countries. We don't care where that cure comes from. We want to just find it as quickly as possible and help provide families and individuals living with dementia with those greatly needed treatments. We're really trying to move the needle on research forward, and we're willing to do everything it takes to make that happen. As I mentioned earlier, we fund across the spectrum of dementia research and really try to bring new ideas into the field and even look at combinations of research studies. How can we maybe combine two different therapies to make a more effective treatment, or combine a lifestyle intervention, which we'll hear much more about in the presentation today, with some type of medication. So we're really focused on strategizing how effectively we can prevent, delay, and ultimately treat this disease. I wanted to take a moment to highlight one study in particular that the Alzheimer's Association is committed to funding and leading the efforts on, and this is the US Pointer study, or the study to protect brain health through lifestyle intervention to reduce risk. So this is part of a global initiative that is bringing together countries around the world focused on brain health and how we can utilize research to identify ways to reduce risk of cognitive decline. We'll talk about all of those different research avenues in the main program, but the US Pointer study is a 2-year clinical trial that's really focused on targeting different lifestyle factors such as diet and exercise, social and cognitive engagement, and overall monitoring of health, and how this combination therapy may help reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And so US Pointer has started recruitment in the United States, and we're really trying to make it as diverse and representative of the entire US population as possible. So in summary, this really is an exciting time in research, and I hope that today you walk away with more hope after our main program, and I hope that you also walk away knowing that the Alzheimer's Association is doing everything we can to lead the global effort to finding that cure. That's why we're so excited to bring you programs such as this, where we can update you on the latest in dementia research. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Margaret O'Connor is President-elect of the International Neuropsychological Society, a scientific and educational organization dedicated to enhancing the international and interdisciplinary study of brain behavioral relationships. She has held leadership positions as co-chair of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Committee of the Alzheimer's Association of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, as well as the Autism and Asperger's Network. Dr. O'Connor is an associate professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. She has had diplomate status in the field of clinical neuropsychology since 1999, and she is a board examiner for the American Academy of Clinical Neuropsychology. Her work has involved studies of amnesia and long-term forgetting with a focus on understanding neuro and physiological substrates of memory. She has also focused on pragmatic areas of research relevant to health and safety of people with dementia. She co-founded DriveWise, a driving assessment program that has provided services for over 900 individuals. In addition to clinical research, she developed educational videos to assist professionals and caregivers in making decisions about driving for people with dementia, as well as those with developmental disabilities. Dr. O'Connor is actively involved in public education efforts to advance research and clinical support for people with cognitive impairments, and we're so happy to have her with us today.
Thank you, Kelsey and Jim and everybody in this room for inviting me to speak tonight. I'm honored to be here. My background is in memory research, as Kelsey said. So for many, many years at the VA hospital in Jamaica Plain, I studied the neural underpinnings of memory and tried to examine how memory changed in the context of age and in the context of specific brain lesions that could be related to stroke or lack of oxygen or encephalitis or epilepsy or brain injuries or dementia. And so I learned a lot over time, and one of the lessons learned was that memory loss exists on a spectrum. Everybody in this room has experienced memory changes that begin actually when you're about age 30, believe it or not. The amount of information you can take in and your speed of retrieval changes even way back then, even at younger years. So Alzheimer's disease, the memory loss that occurs in Alzheimer's disease is at the other end of that spectrum. And when I was a younger clinician, it was really, I saw a lot of patients with Alzheimer's disease, and the conversation that I had with them was very difficult. It was all because there did not seem to be a cure, there did not seem to be a hope, there weren't resources that there are now, which both Jim and Kelsey have highlighted for you. So the conversation now is much more positive. There are research opportunities, there are educational programs, there is support for people who have Alzheimer's disease as well as their families. Jim has highlighted for you the impact and magnitude of this problem. There is no one in this room, including me, who has not been directly touched by Alzheimer's disease. It is an enormous problem that has both emotional and societal impacts that we're still trying to get our arms around. A question that people often have for me when they meet me in the office, or even just in the, casually, socially, has to do with whether their parent or their spouse has Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And it's important to note, thank you.
Open up a different version so it's formatted.
Okay, great. It's important to note that the term dementia is an umbrella term, and there are many different diseases. So if you think of it on a different level, dementia describes a syndrome, a change in cognition that is progressive. This syndrome can be related to underlying Alzheimer's pathology, or it can be related to pathologies such as Lewy body dementia. There's a number of different medical conditions that give rise to dementia. Alzheimer's is by and far the most common cause, but there are many cases, as we'll hear about in a minute, that are mixed. Some forms of dementia are reversible and others are irreversible. So when we think about reversible causes of dementia, we might think about metabolic conditions that cause dementia that can be stabilized. If someone has a UTI or if they have something that upsets their overall medical condition, they can have something called a metabolic encephalopathy that can be dealt with clinically, and they can be restabilized. Some people have toxicity related to alcohol and again may recover from this. There may be vitamin deficiencies or tumors or medication side effects. There are a number of medications that people take either over the counter or by prescription that have very adverse effects on memory and word finding, particularly in the elderly who are so sensitive to this. And then, of course, there's sleep disturbances, both lack of sleep, sleep apnea, all sorts of sleep problems, and we'll talk about that later in the talk, may cause memory loss and dementia that can be reversed when sleep is restabilized. There are, unfortunately, a number of conditions that are both neurodegenerative and vascular that are irreversible, and among them are Alzheimer's disease, dementia of the Lewy bodies, frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, as well as stroke, small vessel disease, and microbleeds. Alzheimer's disease, by definition, refers to problems with memory. And memory, it's usually memory for newly learned information. That's the most common early symptom. People often say that they remember information from the remote past, which may have to do with the fact that that older information is better rehearsed. It's part of what we think of as semantic memory. It's facts. And so older facts are better preserved. Newer episodic memory, new memories of that nature are harder to remember. Other symptoms include disorientation, changes in mood and behavior, confusion, and serious memory loss. And Alzheimer's disease is due to the buildup of proteins that begin as normal proteins in the brain, but that tend to clump together, amyloid plaques and tau, tangles, which cluster both in the central core memory structures of the brain, which are in the middle part of your brain, in the medial temporal lobe, your hippocampus, as well as distributed throughout the cortex. Vascular dementia refers to a condition that looks a little bit different from a neuropsychological point of view. The memory loss that you see in vascular dementia tends to be attentionally based. People have difficulty taking in information and retrieving information, but they don't have the classic Alzheimer's accelerated forgetting. So that's how we differentiate in the office. It's usually caused by reduced blood flow to the brain, and as a result, that kills brain cells. And imaging can help detect that. Now you see in the lower hand corner of this slide the staircase, because when we think about vascular dementia, we think about stepwise progression. There may be an immediate fall off and then a plateau for a certain amount of time, followed by a stair-step progression in the nature of the dementia. And then there's dementia with Lewy body that is related to an abnormal other protein in the brain, alpha-synuclein, which has to do with Parkinson's disease. Lewy body disease is Parkinson's disease in the cortex, and it has a very characteristic clinical profile, which includes a tendency towards visual hallucinations. People may see people or animals or things in the trees, and they know that they're not real, but they still see these images. With dream reenactment, people with Lewy body disease often have very active dreaming states, and they may thrash about in their sleep. They tend to also have memory loss and thinking problems, but again, unlike Alzheimer's disease, they don't have accelerated forgetting. They have an intake problem and a retrieval problem. So it's a different pattern of memory loss. We can make that differentiation clinically in the office. And finally, I'm going to mention frontotemporal dementia, which Kelsey mentioned earlier, which also has a different pattern, a different cognitive presentation. People with frontotemporal dementia, which is often present with language problems more than memory problems. They may have a progressive loss of speech that's known as primary progressive aphasia. They may start with some word-finding difficulties, which evolves into something much more serious to the extent that they may not recognize words. They may have something we call semantic aphasia. They may not recognize what the word ketchup stands for or what the word potato stands for. That's one form of frontotemporal dementia. Another form affects behavior, so that someone may behave inappropriately in all sorts of different circumstances, But again, it doesn't have, frontotemporal dementia doesn't have that characteristic Alzheimer's accelerated forgetting. Symptoms of frontotemporal dementia tend to occur at a younger age, about age 60. In all of these various forms of dementia, early detection is key. And so the question is, why is it important to see your doctor? Why would you want to do that? Well, you heard from both Kelsey and Jim about the incredible work of the Alzheimer's Association, and there's been tremendous progress in terms of research initiatives. So getting into a clinical trial early is very important before there's a lot of cell death. It also helps while the person, when I talk with people who are early in the stage of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, I coach them to be in the driver's seat, to take responsibility and take initiative in how they want to plot out the next steps, who they want to have power of attorney, those sorts of decisions early in the disease you can make. It's important early in the disease to participate in supportive services, to make financial and legal arrangements, to enroll in clinical studies, and to address safety issues while the person is still cognizant. And one of the safety issues that I've been very involved in is driving. Sort of trying to figure out when in the course of Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, someone should give up the keys. And there's very surprising research on that. A lot of the driving studies, including the ones that we've done at Beth Israel with 900 people, indicate that very early in the disease, if someone just has memory loss and they don't have problems with multitasking, they may be able to pass a road test. I know that doesn't mean that they should continue to drive, but a lot of the driving centers have found that to be the case. So early detection, and one of the major advances that has made me as a clinician so excited, has to do with biomarkers that have been introduced, and some of these have been the direct product of research initiatives that have been funded by the Alzheimer's Association. So when Jim showed you that slide showing the amount of money coming into the Alzheimer's Association, it has paid off big time, because early detection can now include a number of different biomarkers that both help determine when someone is at risk for developing dementia, when they're at higher risk. I mean, we are all at risk for developing dementia, everybody in this room. But when they're at higher risk, and it's also very helpful in terms of differential diagnosis, which will be key in terms of the type of treatment intervention that people engage in. One of these is an MRI. So this is a picture of a structural MRI, and you see way over on the left-hand side of the slide what your brain looks like. This is a coronal section. So this is if I took a picture of your brain cut down like this. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, I guess it's the left-hand side for you, sorry, the cognitively normal brain looks kind of plump, and these are people of the same age. And then you'll see how there's more brain atrophy related to mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor stage to the development of dementia. And then Alzheimer's disease, you see even more atrophy. When you see atrophy like this, you know that a certain amount of brain death has occurred, which is irreversible. Some of the initiatives sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association had to do with early detection using what we call functional MRIs or PET scans. And there are two PET scans that have been particularly helpful. One focuses on amyloid. They both focus on those two proteins that are go awry in Alzheimer's disease. So there's an amyloid scan, and again, if you scan from left to right, you'll see there's more amyloid in the scan on the right side, which is more related to Alzheimer's disease, and the other is looking at the neurofibrillary tangles. Tau in the brain. And again, you'll see there's more going from left to right. So the fact that you can do a scan now, and at some point in time we'll have a blood test, To detect early on means that you can intervene earlier. And early intervention is what it's all about. That other slide that I showed you with the structural MRI that showed the cell death, at a certain point, it's hard to intervene. It's hard to use a medication to modify things. But early on, if you see that there's something just a little awry in the brain, you may be able to participate in a clinical trial that is totally targeted on what you need to help stave off further decline. And this slide just shows you that, and it's not, shows you that as the clinical disease stage progresses, you see changes in different biomarkers. So the red line, I believe, it's not labeled here, but the red line is amyloid. You see amyloid first in the brain, and probably that blue line or the purple line is changes in cognition. What does that tell you? Amyloid deposition occurs decades before you see true changes in cognition, again, underscoring the importance of early intervention. This is a very busy slide. My eyes crossed when I saw it. But this is a slide from Jeff Cummings, who's a researcher out in Arizona. It highlights the many, many studies that are targeting specific interventions. And some of these interventions are disease modifying, and some of them are targeted for people who do not have Alzheimer's disease, and some are targeted for people who are early in the course and some late in the course. I'm not going to go through every single one with you, but some are focused on amyloid and less, and so the red ones are amyloid, I believe, and less of them are focused on tau or other agents. And it will probably end up being some cocktail of amyloid and tau agents that work with maybe some other medications thrown in. Another biomarker that is used in the clinic is genetic testing. And so there are different genes. There are genes that just confer a risk of Alzheimer's disease. The E4 gene. If someone has two alleles that are E4, they're at higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't mean that they will. It just increases the risk. Whereas there are other genes, and fortunately, these are much less common. And you can see down there, they're very rare, and about 1% of people who have Alzheimer's disease have either presenilin 1, presenilin 2, or the APP genes. And those tend to be run in families very strongly, and they tend to be in very early onset Alzheimer's disease. So how do we reduce the risk of cognitive decline? Well, that's mostly what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. The physical activity, cardiovascular health, smoking, education, sleep, social engagement, and training. And Kelsey already told you about the Pointer study, which is a very important initiative. Another study is the Sprint Mind study that focused mostly on high blood pressure and the burden of cardiovascular problems in terms of the expression of dementia. And what they found, they studied 9,000 people who were 50 plus, who were either assigned to a standard treatment or intensive treatment. The intensive treatment of high blood pressure reduced the risk of MCI by 19%, which is very amazing. And that's really been the very good news picture that we're seeing in a lot of research studies, including a lot of non-pharmacological interventions, such as that one. So I'm going to tell you about a little webinar that I gave at Harvard Medical School focused on cognitive health. And it touches on all of those issues that we just spoke about. And as a backdrop, what I would tell you that as a younger neuropsychologist 30 years ago, I was taught that your brain didn't grow after about age 26. Maybe you had full myelination of your frontal lobes, and after that, it was all a downhill course. That we had a finite number of neurons. And it was kind of a sad news story. But Truth of the matter is, it was wrong. And work from a number of people out in San Francisco, including Erickson and Gage, have shown that the hippocampus, which is a core structure in our memory circuitry, is capable of growth, as are other parts of your brain throughout the lifespan, and that there are some things we can do to promote growth in the brain. One is eating healthfully. So the Mediterranean diet, you all probably know about that, and you probably all know that there are a number of research studies. Now, I apologize for my number, 7,444 people, but this study from a Spanish group showed that the Mediterranean diet improved both cognition and cardiovascular health. And when we think about this study, as well as some of the studies I'm going to show you on exercise, these are randomized controlled trials. What does that mean? It's the people who conducted the research were blinded to what group people were in. So that makes it a stronger study. It's more interesting. It's more scientific. So we know sorry, I think it just went off. Hello, can you hear me now? Okay. In addition to diet, for some reason exercise is key for enhancing brain health and for synaptic growth. Exercise works in a couple different ways. In addition to making you stronger, it lowers your blood pressure and thereby decreases the risk of heart disease and strokes. It decreases diabetes, which we know has an adverse effect on cognition. It improves the flow of oxygen to the brain. And in a number of studies, there are 3 different studies, and these are complicated slides, but there are 3 different studies, and there are many, many studies, but these are 3 that I've highlighted because they're my favorites. And they have shown that exercise, both in animal research and in human research, promotes growth of synapses and in the hippocampus, that part of the brain that's very important for new learning. So that's exciting because in normal aging, our hippocampi decrease by about 2% every year after you turn age 60. And here we have something that is reversing that tide. So you can see that running increases dendritic complexity and the number of spines in the dentate gyrus, which is part of your memory circuitry. In adults, aerobic exercise was associated with increased cerebral blood volume, and exercise has helped with new memory formation. So those slides at the bottom show dentate gyrus, cerebral blood flow going up, and with oxygen, increased oxygenation. And the study I like best was done by someone at Northeastern University, Arthur Kramer. It's an old study, but again, it was one of those randomized controlled trials. So it was a study where the researchers didn't know what group people were in. And he compared people who were lifting weights to people who were engaged in aerobic exercise. Now, it wasn't like intense aerobic exercise. It was running on a treadmill 3 times a week for about 30 minutes at a higher rate. And what he found, he looked at 120 people who ranged in age from 55 to 80, and he found that aerobic exercise completely trumped stretching and toning in terms of hippocampal growth. And the really interesting, so again, you have a coronal section of the brain over on the left side of the slide, and the highlighted areas in yellow are the hippocampal formation. So you see that there. And on the right side of the slide, if you look at the red lines, you see both in the left hippocampus and the right hippocampus what I told you a little while ago, which is that your hippocampus gets smaller as you get older. But if you look at the people who participated in the aerobic exercise, theirs got just a little bit better. So that was, and again, this is a randomized controlled trial, very exciting research, very convincing. And the part of it that was even more convincing for me, as someone who's interested in memory, is that it was in the anterior hippocampus, which is involved in spatial memory. And there was a correlation between the amount of growth in the anterior hippocampus and performance on spatial memory tasks. So again, that's very exciting research. And it underscores for me the importance of getting to the gym. We also know that there is a story of sleep and memory. And sleep affects memory either adversely or positively in a couple different ways. One has to do with the fact that sleep deprivation increases that amyloid in the brain, that abnormal protein that may result in Alzheimer's disease. And sleep extension has the opposite effect. Once amyloid accumulates, there's increased wakefulness. So having a lot of amyloid in the brain can disrupt your sleep. And we know that as we get older, we have changes in our overall sleep architecture, our sleep pattern. And we know from a number of people, including some of my colleagues at Harvard Medical School, that there are specific sleep stages that are key for memory consolidation and that are key for procedural memory and other forms of memory to take in memory. So there are different, if you look at different wavelengths, stage 1 is called non-REM sleep. It's very light, it's low waves, and we go into deeper and deeper periods of sleep, including a sleep stage called REM, which is rapid eye movement, when you have fast waves and low voltage. And these different stages of sleep are critical for memory formation. So if you're depriving yourself of getting into the lower stages of sleep, not only are you causing more amyloid to accumulate in your brain, but you're also not allowing your brain to run the cycle that's so important in terms of memory consolidation. Now, if I had better vision right now, I would read you the cartoon, but I don't. I can't read it across the room. What do we know about sleep and cognitive functions? We know that the rapid eye movement stage of sleep is very key for problem solving. Stage 2 is important for memory consolidations, and spatial memories are strengthened in the hippocampus during slow wave or deep sleep. We also know, sleep's hard as you get older. It's, people become very sensitive to light in the room, to using the computer. So there are different, if you Google sleep hygiene, you will find a lot of different ways of improving your own sleep, which include making your sleep regular, exposing yourself to light in the morning, limiting daytime naps, and what is called setting bed boundaries. Now, that does not mean erecting a fence around your bed. What it means is that you don't use your bed as your desk. So I do, but you're not supposed to. And so, of course, there's also the condition of sleep apnea, which does result in, it needs to be treated because there's inadequate oxygen getting to your brain. It's associated with memory loss. It's associated with tissue loss in critical centers that are important for memory. So that's something that is reversible and something to deal with. So, okay, here we go. What I'm going over with you now are what I call pushbacks and ways of modifying what normally happens to us as we age. How do we deal? How do we push back the inevitable loss of memory that occurs with age? And one of the problems that some people experience is stress, which has been associated with increased mild cognitive impairment, and certainly is something that can be managed either through talk therapy or through meditation or through engaging in some other exercise to reduce stress. And I'm sorry, I'm slipping. So there are a number of places around the state, around the city. Everyone is involved in mindfulness exercises. I ran a mindfulness group at Beth Israel for many years with the Lama, and people loved it. And what helped, and it sounds challenging. For me, it was sort of, I don't think I could ever meditate. I don't think I have the attention span to meditate, but it's a matter of allowing yourself to do that and to practice it and to learn how to do it. And for some people, it's very effective, both because it allows them to be in the moment, and therefore when you're present, you can remember things better, but it also decreases stress, which, as I just told you, has an adverse effect on memory. Now, one thing that happens with people with Alzheimer's disease and memory loss is depression. And depression is both a risk factor for dementia as well as a consequence of dementia. And there are a number of people, actually there was a woman on the MedSci board, Nancy Donovan, whose primary research is on the relationship between depression and MCI. And what we find is that if there is a depressed mood, there's typically a higher incidence of mild cognitive impairment. And depression in and of itself may lead to deficits in brain growth, synaptic plasticity, and greater hippocampal atrophy. We also know there's a phenomenon that's called stereotype threat, which really means self-fulfilling prophecy, which really means that your attitude about yourself may affect how you deal, how you function in life. There are those many studies of young girls who are told, this is a math test that you're going to take, and they flunk it, or they're given the same test and it's, oh, this is a fun little puzzle that you're going to do, and they do well. So it's sort of what you get in your head about how you're going to do that may affect how you do. Individuals who believe that they're likely to succeed or more likely to engage in behaviors that they believe will achieve desired goals. They're more likely to adhere to physical regimens, to be active in daily life, and to maintain exercise. And in like manner, individuals who believe that there are things they can do to influence memories use strategy to improve. If you don't believe in yourself, then you're not going to use strategies, you're not going to improve. So, intellectual stimulation, and I applaud everybody in this room because you're here, you're involved in something, maybe you're learning something new, maybe you already knew everything I'm saying right now anyway, but I'm sure you're involved in some intellectually engaging tasks. And it's very important because there are many studies, including this one from the Mayo Clinic, that has shown that being involved in something intellectual may stave off cognitive impairment by 7 years or so. And so people often say, what should I do? It should be something new that's a little bit challenging, but also something that you really like doing. And our knowledge about this comes from two sources. One is this man here, Jakob Stern, who his whole life has been devoted to developing this idea of cognitive reserve, which is that people who have a well-furnished mind, people who are readers, people who are teachers, people who are thinkers, tend to withstand the ravages of neurodegeneration better than other people. And we know this from the NUN study. So I don't know if all of you know about the NUN study. It's a study that's been around for many years, but it's yielded a lot of really important information. And one of the things, aside from intellectual stimulation, which I'll get to in a minute, one of the things that the NUN study taught us, is that dementia can be related to the convergence of vascular pathology and Alzheimer's pathology. That the addition of having little infarcts in your brain made a very significant difference in the clinical expression of dementia. And we know that that's something that we can modify. So that's important. So this is a study that was developed by someone named David Snowden, who was at the University of Minnesota and then went to University of Kentucky. And he looked at 678 Sisters of the Notre Dame who were between the ages of 75 and 102. And he saw them every 4 months. He did little clinical exams every 4 months, and they all donated their brains when they died. So he had really good clinical data on these nuns, and then he also had neuropathological data. Now, why is it important to study nuns? Because it's a homogeneous environment. So he was kind of looking at the same, he was controlling for a lot of other factors that do vary in other studies. And what he found overall is that intellectual activity was neuroprotective. So I'm going to just tell you about one of the nuns, who was Sister Mattia, and she was a model of healthy aging. She was a teacher for 62 years, and she retired at age 77. And during her retirement, she was actively engaged, and she was dementia-free until she was 104. Her post... What am I doing? Stand back. Her post... Can you hear me? No? Her post-mortem exam revealed what we used to call hardening of the arteries, atherosclerosis, and Alzheimer's disease. So she had a twofer. She had cerebral vascular disease and Alzheimer's disease. But she had a lot of cognitive reserve. So even though when she was matched with other people, even though she had all that badness in her brain, she was dementia-free at the time of her death. She was clinically intact. She did not look demented. And post hoc, people thought that that was related to the fact that she had been so engaged intellectually during her many years as a teacher. So all this is to say that there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of promise on the horizon. There are a lot of medication drug trials that have been sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association and that take place both at Mass General Hospital and at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. Some of these are focused on, and if you participate in one of these studies, you no doubt will have a pretty thorough clinical evaluation. There'll be biomarkers with some of them, not with all, neuroimaging techniques. The people who run these studies are amazing. I just referred one of my 62-year-old friends to one of the studies. I run a memory group. I'm at the Brigham, and three of the participants in my memory group today talked about being in the A4 trial and how much they got out of doing that. And it was and we're going to hear from a research ambassador in a little while. So there's you also will get information that is disseminated to professionals in the community concerning Alzheimer's disease. Some of the trials are just observational. They're just watching changes. And to participate in these trials, we're looking for people who have Alzheimer's disease and people who don't have Alzheimer's disease, all ages. Some are observational, such as the Harvard Aging Brain Study, and some of them have clinical interventions, including treatment that are at times geared towards prevention, geared towards using a biomarker to determine whether someone's at risk and then intervening, like the A4 trial, someone who's not symptomatic, or symptomatic people. So this is the clinical trials. Some of the clinical trials use amyloid, tau proteins in the brain. They're targeting those. They're trying to get them out of the brain in order to modify the disease. There's a number of different medication types, including monoclonal antibodies, any drug that's aducanumab, solanezumab. The drugs that end in MAB are monoclonal antibody drugs, and BACE inhibitors. Studies typically include medications, memory testing, blood work. The observational studies can include memory testing, neuroimaging, and the range of commitment varies from one study. Sometimes it's one visit and an annual commitment. And the investigator-initiated studies focus on changes in daily functions, a digital assessment of cognition, depression, subjective cognitive complaints. The question, why does research matter? I think most everybody in this room knows this already. Why does research matter? Because it's going to help us figure out the cure. I mean, that's really why it matters. And it's going to take a lot of people to participate in these research trials in order for them to move forward, because you need a lot of numbers. So it both helps us understand normal aging and dementia, it will improve the detection, and finally, most important, it will lead to potential ways to delay or prevent Alzheimer's disease. What are the challenges? There's an obstacle in recruiting and retaining study participants. Individuals with dementia or those at risk of developing it, healthy volunteers, caregivers, everybody is urgently needed to participate in 250 enrolling clinical trials. And we need diversity. We need to understand the effects of race, the effects of gender in the expression of Alzheimer's disease and how it sort of proceeds over time. So, how do you learn about Research Near Me? I think that you have brochures already, so you should be able to contact people at Trial Match. When I see people in my office who have Alzheimer's disease, I go on the website and go through Trial Match with them. It's very easy to use, and I encourage you to do that. So in addition to the Trial Match card, you can stop by the CART resource table, which is in the back of the room, to learn about current studies at Mass General and the Brigham and Maclean's, or to join a mailing list to receive a newsletter. So before we take questions, we are very honored to have Phil Cunningham here tonight, who is a research ambassador, and he's going to speak to us about his experience. So thank you, Phil, for doing that.
Good evening. When I was asked to come tonight, had I known that I was going to follow someone as thoroughly versed in the discussion and eloquent, I probably wouldn't have shown up. Anyway, okay. My name is Phil Cunningham. I live in Plymouth. I'm going to tell you a very little bit about me and try and explain what it means to be in a clinical trial. I'm a husband, a father, a grandfather, and I'm a clinical trial subject. So that's why I'm here tonight. Way back in the day in the 70s, I was an Air Force officer for 9.5 years. I was a pilot for 6 years and an engineer for about 3.5. After I left the Air Force, I had a 35-year engineering career in intelligence analysis and systems acquisition for the MITRE Corporation in Bedford, Massachusetts, and I retired in 2014 as a department head. So I worked in the field of science and technology, and I worked with some really sharp, very talented people. And very often I would come home at night and say to my wife, I had a meeting today, and I was the dumbest guy in the room. Both my parents led very active lives and healthy until my father got ill in his late 70s, and he died. He died, nothing related to dementia or Alzheimer's. My mother lived for 20 years after that, so she lived to the age of 98. And she was in Houston, I was up in this area. But about age 90, I began to see some subtle differences in her cognitive ability. And she was a feisty old gal from New York City originally. But around 90, I saw these changes. And I began to question some of her judgment. She didn't drive, thank goodness, but she took the buses all over Houston. And twice she was mugged, had her purse stolen, her ID stolen, et cetera, et cetera. She was an easy mark. If you've ever been to Houston in the summertime, it's very much like Florida, very hot, very humid. And her air conditioner in her apartment broke. And I went down to see her. And she said that she had called the maintenance people to fix it, and they came and did something. But I found her sleeping on her kitchen tile floor because that was the coolest place in the apartment. So I was her healthcare proxy. So I took her to a neurologist who gave her a short test called an MMSE, Mini Mental State Evaluation. Some of you may know about that. And he said, I think she has dementia, probably by Alzheimer's. She took a prescription drug called Exelon, which is one of 4 approved drugs by the FDA to sort of forestall the progression of Alzheimer's. And she lived to age 98, feisty as all get out. And she really didn't decline cognitively. So I don't know whether she had dementia. I don't know whether Exelon really did the job. I just don't know. But I had some satisfaction in intervening at age 90, and she lived to 98. And only in the very end did she have significant health problems. But that got me to thinking about me. And I'm not here to talk about me, but I guess I am in a sense. I have had some friends who have had dementia, who do have dementia and Alzheimer's, and I see what that does to a family, to caregivers. So I said to myself, gee, if I'm predisposed to that, and I don't know that I am, and that didn't display any symptoms, I ought to do something about it. So I found the A4 study in 2015 at Brigham and Women, and I was tested, and you go through several months of qualification, if you will. And so come the day for the results, we sat in front of the neurologist, and he said, with my wife, he said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you qualify for our study. The bad news is you have more than the normal level of amyloid. So of course I was upset to find that out. But I thought, well, okay, maybe I am predisposed. I'm going to do something about it. I'm just not going to sit back. So anyway, that's why I'm here. So it was a selfish motivation on my part, but also both of my parents, at the end of their lives, donated their bodies to medical schools. And I thought that was pretty noble, and I want to do something while I'm still alive for myself and for science. To enter the A4 study, as you just heard, I had to have normal cognition, but I did have elevated amyloid as detected by MRI and PET scan. So in the short amount of time that I have, I can't tell you all about the clinical trial. I'm taking positive steps to contribute to the body of knowledge. I joined the study as an individual, not with a group of people, but I met some amazing people, and I'm friends with them today at Brigham and Women. The staff are just absolutely amazing in this thing called the CART, the Center for Alzheimer's Research and Treatment. Wonderful people. Some of us, and I'm now called a research ambassador. I'm really a lab rat. You know, research ambassador is a highfalutin term. But I have found about 11 people, just like me, in clinical trials in the A4, some at Rush Medical in Chicago, and one at Butler Hospital in Providence, and a number of them at Brigham and Women. And we have this little informal email group going, a little support group. So we learn a lot. We learn a lot because the clinical trial is conducted in Chicago and in Providence. So sometimes they do something that we don't do yet, and we find out about it that way. It's very beneficial. So as I said, the staff in the CART is very, very supportive. I live in Plymouth. I take a commuter rail and a red line and a green line to Longwood Ave in Boston. It's a long day. I do that. I could drive. I prefer not to. So it's a long day for me. It's once a month. That's what I signed up for. And it consists of about an hour and a half in a room. I get an infusion. I'll talk about that in a second. Every 3 months, I get cognitive testing. Periodically, I get more intensive testing. And once in a while, I get an MRI or PET scan. And that's how the people who are paying for this study look at my amyloid, my tau level, etc., look at my cognitive scores, and see how I'm progressing. So I've been doing this for 4.5 years. I never thought when I started I'd still be in it for 4.5 years, but I am in it for 4.5 years, and I'm going. Pretty soon, I should say, I am getting either the drug, solanezumab, or a placebo. It's a double-blind study. They won't tell me. And the people who administer the drug to me, they don't know either, so they don't treat me differently. Other people outside where I am know if I'm getting the drug or not. But I have progressed in the study far enough to know that I'm going to reach what's called the open label period pretty soon. And that means I'm guaranteed to get the drug along about February or March, I think, once a month for a period of time. So I'm actually looking forward to that. I have to say, once I got the infusions, I didn't hear funny noises, I didn't see funny things, I didn't see angels, I didn't hear thunder, the ground didn't shake, nothing. And my family said, nothing, nothing? You must be getting the placebo. I said, I don't really know, I don't know. They won't tell me until well after the study is over, by the way. I do a fair amount of reading on Alzheimer's disease and clinical trials. I've learned an awful lot. I wish I could be in a program, a trial that had both anti-amyloid and anti-tau, kind of like belt and suspenders, but I can't do that. But there's many trials out there. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, it is a wealth of knowledge, and you can search on that till you're blue in the face. It's an amazing repository, as are the repositories that have been mentioned here tonight. So if you are at all inclined in being active, in participating, I encourage you to take that step. There's a lot that are out there. They're not all by infusion like I get. There are some that have pills. There are some that just have tests. You may think it's time consuming. It's 1 day a month. Think about that, 1 day a month. And as I said, 4.5 years has flown by. So I just want to say to you, if you want to take the next step, by coming here tonight, you took a big step actually, and thank you for doing that. If you want to take the next step, there are people here who can help you figure out what that would be. And I'm going to hang around for a little while. I'll be here for the Q&A if you have any questions for me. And if you don't want to ask them in public, I'll hang around in the back. And if you want to ask me in private, that's okay too. I'm good with that. Thank you very much for your attention.